crafty friends, welcome back. Today we are going to sew this Stingray felt plushie. This one has an option to be a finger puppet or a finished felt plushie. I have a link to a free pattern in the description below, so go ahead, click that link, print your pattern, come back here, and we're going to sew this together. This is a beginner level project. It is great for kids with a little bit of adult supervision or someone who just wants to learn some basic stitches and sew a fun, cute project. So go ahead, click that link, print your pattern, come back here, and let's sew this together. To sew this beginner-friendly Ray felt plushie, you're going to need felt in the color that you want your Ray. This pattern, again, it's in the description below. You can click and print it for free. Some embroidery floss. This is just kind of thicker thread. You can also use normal thread. It just is going to give it a little bit of a different look. I like this embroidery floss, this thick thread. Something to trace your pattern with, scissors to cut it out with. You're going to want some bigger scissors. Kids' scissors are not friendly for felt. It's just too hard. A needle. If you're using embroidery floss, you're going to want one that has a bigger hole at the top or an embroidery floss needle. And then something to stuff your plush with. I like the leftover felt scraps, but you can also use polyfill. I've used plastic bags. There's a lot of options here. Be flexible with yourself, so hold on to your scraps if you want to do that. If not, you can grab some polyfill, plastic bag, whatever you want. Let's get started. Now it's time to trace your design. As you're getting ready to trace it, make sure that you put your pattern right at the edge of your felt so you can use as much as your felt as possible. And as you're tracing it, trace the first time the side with the design where it says cut to, and then as you're tracing the second one, flip it over and trace the back side. This is just going to make it line up nicer when we're sewing it together. You don't need to worry about these lines right now. Don't cut them out, but we are going to use those as a guide for when we are sewing this together to give it kind of those flappy, pancakey, stingray wings. Now, as you're cutting this pattern out, cut off your tracing lines. This way that they're not going to show up in your final design, especially with the tail. You're going to want to make sure you cut off any black marks or any marker marks that you have on it. Now it's time to start sewing. So grab some embroidery floss in a color that matches your felt. And I'm going to start by threading my needle. And then I'm going to pull both strands really even right here at the end. And I'm going to tie a knot here and I'm going to make a circle. And then I'm going to take these two ends, I'm going to tuck it under. So kind of making a pretzel shape. And then I'm going to hold on to the space where the thread is crossed and pull on the side of the thread that my needle's attached to, sliding that knot in so it's right here at the end of my thread so I don't have a super long tail. If you do end up with a long tail, that's fine, just trim it off. So the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to line up these seed pancakes, see where I want my tail, and we are going to attach the tail. I'm going to lay the tail just a little bit over the top of this wreath, and with my thread with a knot at the end, I'm going to go in one side, and then I'm going to come back through. I've pulled my thread somewhat tight, kind of close together, and then I'm going to put my needle through these two threads back here, and I'm just going to pull it. Whoop, try not to get your tail stuck in it. And I'm just going to pull that knot down that's attaching my tail. Just get a little tiny thread bob right there. And then I'm going to do this to knot it in place. So I'm going to tuck my needle through these threads attaching the tail. And then I'm going to wrap the tail around the top of the needle 2 times. I'm going to push the needle up a little, and then I'm going to put my finger right here to hold these threads in place as I pull my needle all the way through and tighten that up. And that's just giving me an inside knot. So the tail is knotted in place, the front and back, and we can trim that off. And now we get to start the fun stuff. We are going to start sewing this Ray together. So this time I am going to, instead of doubling my knot at the end, I'm going to do a single knot. So again, I'm doing a circle, tucking it in, and then I'm just moving my knot to the end so I can pinch it with my fingers, have a little tail, pull that through. I'm going to move my needle down a little bit. We are going to do a little knot stitch. So I'm going to go in here and back in here. And just like we knotted that tail, we're going to do a little knot stitch right here. So I'm pulling it almost to the end. And I don't have 2 threads to go through, so I'm just going to poke it kind of in the middle of this bundle of threads. And there's my knot. I'm just going to tuck it inside this Ray. Now we're going to do a modified blanket stitch. So we're going to go through both pieces of felt. Then we're going to grab this tail hanging off the end. I'm going to wrap it around the front of the needle. And we're going to pull it all the way through. And then we're going to go down just a little bit. Wrap it, put it through both pieces of felt. and wrap the tail over the end of the needle and pull it through. And it gives this nice stitch where we have this line across the top and then these halfway down lines. You can see kind of on this other felt creature, it gives us a stitch like this that goes all the way around, and it just looks really nice. So we are going to do this blanket stitch around our entire ray. We're going to come back and we're going to pause kind of on this equal distance on the other side over here. Now, as you're sewing, where you place the needle is less important than keeping the edges of your fabric or your felt together. So if it ends up getting sliding off, like you can see my eye patterns aren't exactly even back here, it doesn't really matter because we're going to stuff it and that's going to change how those align anyway. But you do want the two edges of the felt close together because it's going to make it look neater and more well put together when we're finishing it up. So I'm only about halfway around my ray and I have run out of string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a knot stitch right here. So I'm going to pull my blanket stitch over like I was before, but instead of just doing it once, I'm going to do it twice. I'm going to pull my needle through. This is going to give me a little extra knot right here. And then I'm going to take this thread and I'm going to poke it into my ray. Kind of actually don't even need to. And I'm going to pull my thread off on the inside. I'm just going to lay it in there so it doesn't unravel. And then I'm going to start another stitch right here at the edge. So let me grab some more thread. So I have my needle threaded. Again, I'm going to knot this stitch at the end. The inside of my little plushie, I'm going to go in and out. Pull my thread through almost to the end. Stick it into the middle of this thread that I have my knot at the end. Pull it all the way down, and then I'm going to tuck that tail into my creature, into my stingray, and I'm right here at the edge, and now I'm just going to continue with my blanket stitch. So we are going to continue the blanket stitch until we get here right near the bottom. We want big enough space that we can put our finger into it, but not significantly more than that. And we are going to pause our blanket stitch for a minute, but we're going to look at our pattern over here, and you know how we have these two lines? We are going to create those on our stingray with what's called a running stitch. So you can see they kind of curve over a little. It's not a straight line from here to there. It is a little bit curved. And we are going to do them with a running stitch. So a running stitch, I think, is even more easy or even easier than a blanket stitch. Just go in one side, move your needle along a little, and go back through the other side. So we're just going up and down, and we're going to create that kind of curved pattern on our stingray. All right, I'm getting right here to the end, and I am going to merge this with my blanket stitch over here. So I'm just going to go through that same line, and I am going to create a knot right here. So I'm going to go through it. I'm going to put the edge of my embroidery floss around the needle 2 times. I'm going to hold it in place with my finger, slide it out, and create a knot right here. I'm going to trim it as close to the edge as I can without cutting my knot off. I push it under the bottom of my stingray. Okay, now I'm going to come do the same thing on this other side, but this time instead of starting at the bottom, I'm going to start at the top. So I'm going to curve around this way so that my thread ends over here and I can close up the stingray at the end. And I'm looking at my thread right now and I think it's a little too short to make it, so I'm going to get a longer piece. All right, now that I have my longer piece ready, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to find the blanket stitch I want to start. I'm going to go through, try and get as close to both of those holes as I can. I'm going to go through them both, pull my string almost towards the end, and I'm going to separate these fibers out a little bit, put my needle through the middle of them, pull that knot down. I'm going to work it towards the bottom of my stingray. Okay, and now I've got my starting point. And again, I'm going to do that running stitch. I'm going to go from here down to the tail where I started. All right, so I'm right here by the bottom, and now we're going to pause again. And this, I think, is the funnest part. We are going to get your felt scraps or your polyfill or whatever you want to stuff in it, and we are going to stuff the middle of our stingray, and then we're going to close them off at the end. Alternatively, you could knot it off here, not stuff it at all, and you do have yourself a kind of awesome finger puppet. So I'm going to close him off, but if you wanted to pause right here and just knot this off, you could be ready with a cool thing. So you make your choice if you want to stuff it or if you wanted a finger puppet. I'm going to keep going with stuffing it. I think it's going to be great either way. So as you're stuffing your felt plushie, I usually start with smaller pieces, and sometimes I need to cut my scraps even smaller, and you're going to want to work the pieces as far to the far places first. I'm going to stuff in a little bit, and then I'm going to grab my marker. My fingers aren't quite big enough to reach. I'm going to stuff them down all the way into here. Grab some more. And then when you have it stuffed the way that feels full and good to you, we're going to go ahead and we're going to continue on with a blanket stitch. We're going to sew around this tail and we're going to close it off. I usually do a running stitch around the tail. This one might be small enough we can blanket. Okay, and in this last stitch, we're going to go through this blanket stitch. We're going to take the edge of your string and we're going to wrap it around the needle tip twice. Hold it in place with the top of your finger so it doesn't slide down your needle and make a loose knot. You're going to pull your thread all the way through and out and then pull it tight. And we're going to trim it off as close to the knot as you can get without cutting off your knot. And there we have it. Cute felt stingray. If you like this sew along or you're interested in more easy felt sew alongs, be sure to like, follow along, comment, subscribe, and I will be back next week with a new pattern and a new sew along. Thank you.